Hi, I'm JD. I'm going to give some reflections on my COMP348 assignment 4, which is the final project. So for this project, we're basically going to write an email client using the JavaMail API. So to begin with, one will notice that there are a few components. It's not just all programming. So essentially we have to keep a journal or a notebook of our progress through learning about the JavaMail API and completing this assignment. And we have to do some research, which basically means learning how to use the JavaMail API and doing a tutorial. And then actually building 3 little programs, 2 of which are almost the same, which basically parse a text file, send email based on the information in that. And another one that lets you, the second one is the same but with an attachment. It lets you send files. And the third one lets you view emails. So for me, the process of going through this was more or less straightforward. I guess the major difference between this and other assignments is that you need to do a little research and learn something without using university sanctioned materials. So to start with, I went to the landing, which doesn't have as much activity as I'd like right now, probably because it's the summer, I'm going to guess. But if you go to here, you can see all the posts that other students have written about assignment 4, and there's lots of resources here. So some of this stuff's pretty useful. So one of the other students had written about some resources that they found very useful, and one of them was this course, or this tutorial on TutorialsPoint. And the English is a little dodgy, and I've even found a few bugs in their code examples, but it was pretty useful because they cover the exact sorts of stuff that you need. So if you wanted to go through that, it'll explain a little bit about how to get this. Basically, you have to go to GitHub and download the JavaMail API, and you might need another Java jar file, the activation, I believe it is. Is it activation.jar? Yes, you'll need that jar file. So once you've gone through some of these tutorials, you pretty much know everything you need to know to get the work done for this assignment. So one thing I'll add though is that I was using a Gmail account, and so I've got a few test messages here. So you'll notice that if you are using Gmail, you have to go into settings and in here and make sure that you enable POP for all mail and save the settings. So that way you can use both POP and IMAP. To start with, the TutorialsPoint tutorials do use POP. So in the end, I got tired of POP because once you check a mail message, it disappears and won't really show up again because of the nature of how POP3 works. And I find that to be a pain, but in the end it's very, very simple to just switch everything over to IMAP. You don't have to use different commands or anything like say you would if you were working it over Telnet. In addition, I found that it was handy to go into my account settings and my Google account settings and remove, there's some preferences for allowing insecure apps. So it's somewhere in here, but yeah, oh yeah, this is the setting here. So allow less secure apps. That'll let me not worry as much about having to connect with the same level of security that Google typically expects. So in the previous assignment, we had to write a little server that created a poem, and it had to read the poem out from a text file. So in doing that, I had created a little parser, and I basically reused that to do something very similar. So when the program starts, it goes through and uses all these different regular expressions to look for parts of the email, the server, username, password, etc. And in doing that, you can just create a bunch of variables that have all the information you need to build the email. And if you've got everything you need, then great, you can go on and send the email. If not, you can maybe return a message saying that you don't have enough information. You might not have a recipient or a from address or a password or something like that. So in a nutshell, pretty straightforward. This is very similar to the code used in the tutorial. So we're setting some properties here, creating a session object. Once you have your session, you use it to build the message, set all the properties of the message with the information that you got from the text file, and you're off to the races. So pretty straightforward. Here's a little function I did just to show some help, and it documents how to create that text file. Additionally, for the subsequent part, basically just added another section that lets you, where is that part? So in the part that parses the text file, I now have an extra thing that looks for attachments. Here we go, attachment pattern. So notice I have a little question mark here, so if you put attachment or attachments, that'll work either way. So once you do that, I was just creating some file objects with that here. And in the part that actually goes and sends the email, you look in the array of file objects, and this part here, you just add body parts, which sounds kind of gruesome, but that's what you do. And you build your email and add it to the message and send it. Very straightforward, really. It's not a lot of extra work on top of the original send mail program. Get mail. So this one, again, based largely on the example given. So take all the parameters. Here's the main function. So look for all the parameters that are required, do your error handling, make it nice and user-friendly as far as you could make a program like this user-friendly. Go and take the list of parameters, and I wrote a function called getMailList here. In getMailList, you can, let's see here, so connect to the store, and get an array of messages. So essentially just loop through the messages. Now this is pretty straightforward. If there is, so for each message, if you haven't specified a parameter that says I want to view this specific message in detail, you just print out the subject and the from address, and I put a little number, so that's like your index number. And then if someone runs it again using one of these numbers, if you see that number here, instead of printing every mail, we just go into the write part function. So write part is a recursive function, and because parts can themselves contain other parts. If you have multi-part emails or you have embedded messages in an email, so this calls itself. So for the message part, it'll print the header. I've got a function that just prints the from, to, addresses, subject, etc. And this goes through and handles printing the text. So for most parts, it's pretty straightforward, but I did add a special function that goes here and looks to see if any of the parts have plain text. If it does, then I pass a Boolean to the write part function that says basically don't print HTML. So if it finds an HTML part, it'll skip that, because it's pretty ugly trying to read, HTML marketing mails on the command line like this. So you probably don't want to see them if you already have a plain text part that is designed to be easy to read in this scenario. And in addition, I also added some file handling. So using some code like this, you can actually look to see if a part is an attachment, and if it is, basically you create a little buffer, create a file output stream, read the attachment data into the buffer, write it to the disk, and then voila, you've got some files. You can get the original file name from the email and save it with that name, or maybe you want to do something fancier like put it in a special folder so that you don't end up with file collisions. Obviously, for purposes of the assignment, I didn't care too much about that, but it works pretty well. It took me a little fiddling because the example from the TutorialsPoint demonstration didn't really work well for this, but I found a different example on Stack Overflow, and that let me write the files. So I'm just going to run a little example. I will show what this program looks like for getting mail. So I created a little, because the command to run this stuff is pretty obtuse, I just made a little shell script that runs. And oh yeah, so we have to also compile it first. There, so that should have compiled everything, and now we can run our get mail script. And this will connect to the mail account I just showed, this one called Supacon. And there are a bunch of emails, so it looks pretty good. Now if we run it again and specify a parameter, so my shell script just takes the first parameter and makes that the fourth parameter. I'm deliberately not showing the full command to run this because it's got my email password in it, which I'd rather not give up even though it's a spam account. But anyways, so let's see, we've got this nice marketing email from Red Robin, so let's view that one. And they get really fancy with their text formatting, and one of the features I demonstrated earlier was that we skip HTML emails because you probably don't want to view those. What else have we got here? So let's run this again to look at the list. And here's one that does file attachments. So if we run that, I've got a few files on there. And as you can see, it saved all the files. If we look at, here's our, let's do this with, so that is the current time. We can see that's a new file that it just generated. And there's our PNG and our zip file. So it's actually saving the attachment. So kind of cool that we're able to do that. So yeah, I thought this was kind of a neat assignment because it shows how easily you can do things using Java, like trying to write a mail client. You don't have to deal with any pop commands. You don't have to really mess around with SSL and TLS too much other than just setting a setting. Really simple to do stuff like this, and you could totally do some legitimately useful things with this because let's say you wanted to go and clean up your email or go through all your messages and save all the attachments into a folder and delete them. Like, you could write a Java program that could do that stuff fairly easily. So pretty cool. So with that, I will conclude this video, and I hope you found this useful and interesting. And if you have any questions or comments about any of this stuff or would like to see anything else, please let me know. Thanks.